I published a lot of articles, and so that whole case is full of articles and books, right? But most of the articles are academic articles. They're in a sense they're analytic, analyzing religion as something objectified, or kinship, technical papers, right? I think tradition and transformation would be the one that wasn't. It was, but it wasn't. It was just how you put things together in that culture, how it works, that kind of thing. But it didn't have the whole picture. Then I wrote a report to the government of the Northern Territory on local government, which they published in the Northern Territory, which I thought was pretty good work, because it kind of did a look at different social organizations throughout the territory of different Aboriginal groups. And one anthropologist in Australia said that it was probably the best summary of Aboriginal social org that was available anywhere. It was very summary, but it was really right on from their point of view, right? It was not the mainstream interpretation of the skin system or clan system or anything. It was different. Again, I did it from the point of view of the people that I was working with, not from a theoretical point of view. But the rest, when it came to Spirit Lives, Life Before Genesis was an early one, which I wrote in Holland at the Netherlands Institute for Advanced Studies. Return to Eden. What were the other ones? I can't even remember the names of half of them, but there was a whole group. They were in the Toronto Studies in Religion series. Okay, I could never ever have got those published anywhere else, but with a guy called Don Weeb in Trinity College, who was a professor in the theology department. I wouldn't say he saved my career. He just helped me direct it to where I wanted it to go. Chris Trott was actually a student when I was at Trinity, and Chris, in those days, students nominated professors to be in the college. They weren't appointed, well, they were appointed by other professors eventually, but students did the nomination. And at the time, it was, I was really fed up with the politics at U of T and the anthro department. I mean, really fed up. And I'd just come back from a sabbatical in England, where I went back to look at my background there, my parents' background, in a little village in Yorkshire called Old Lindley. I just wanted to know, and I found some interesting stuff, as other people had found. But one, that English villages weren't villages at all. They were collections of individuals working out, and they had been for hundreds of years. This was not new. The Industrial Revolution did not cause this. This was the way it always was. It was a very mobile, not a very cohesive society, right? And there's all that. I think a guy called McFarlane wrote a book about it, The Origins of English Individualism, an excellent book. Yeah, and he's saying it didn't really cause the Industrial Revolution happened because there was this mobile force around it. It had always been there. You figure out conquest. You had Saxons, you had Danes, you had everybody raping and pillaging through that whole north of England all the time, right? Anyway, I went back there to just to look at it, and then I came home, and I got an invitation to go to the Netherlands Institute for Advanced Studies for a year, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do, right? Because I was kind of interested also in Canadian history at that point too, and here, where it came from and the community. So I started out having a project to write a book about Canadian history, basically. But it got to be too bulky and too much. And it was just at the time where the new Constitution was going through, that Trudeau was putting through, which I was dead against, and I was writing to people in the British Parliament to stop it and all kinds of stuff. Because I didn't like it. I liked the local community thing. I liked the British North America Act. I thought that was a great piece of work. So anyway, whatever. Comes through, and then we come back to Canada after that year. But during that year, I took on another project, a small project, and I read the book of Genesis in the Bible. And all of a sudden, I understood what it meant without ever having really studied it in a kind of funny sense, popular sense, right? What I did was I put the Australian Aboriginal culture as I knew it in front of the Book of Genesis and read the two together. And it made complete sense in completely different terms than I've ever read anywhere about it. Because Australian Aboriginal culture on Groote Eyland's got a base of 4. There's 4 clan groupings, each with a number of clans in each grouping. It's an alternate generation marriage system, which means you marry the same clan every second generation. That's the ideal. And up until the missionaries came, they pretty well, from my records, they pretty well stuck to it. Very rarely deviated from. However, if you remove one clan away and you only have 3, you have a problem. You cannot have alternate marriage marriage with the same clan in alternate generations with 3 clans. You have to have 4. See? That's why I think my clan, the Lalara, came over from the mainland to Bickerton Island to become that 4th clan when that other clan migrated over to Groote. That's what I think happened. So anyway, you can't have a system. You've got to find another partner. So it's a major, major crisis, ecological, economic, every way, spiritual, if one clan leaves. So you read the Book of Genesis. There's Adam and Eve in their own garden doing everything un-Aboriginal, trying to be autonomous and self-sufficient within their own garden, which is heresy from an Aboriginal point of view. Because in Aboriginal culture, you have to give up your partner or your sister or whatever to somebody else somewhere else in marriage. The resources you have, you can't consume yourself. You have to go somewhere else. Forbidden fruit in the garden. Why is it forbidden? Why does God forbid the fruit from eating in the garden? Well, because that fruit in the garden is not meant for the people in that garden. It's meant for people in another garden somewhere else. So you go through the whole thing, right? It just all fits together. What happened way back in pre-Hebrew times or Hebrew times was that a 4-clan system. One of them left, was trying to leave, become autonomous and self-sufficient, keeping their women for themselves or men for themselves and the resources for themselves. And the other ones didn't like it. So they kicked them out. And they kicked them out and set them on this path, which is history of the Hebrews and the Jewish people, trying to figure out what they have to come back to. And they've never figured it out, never figured out what they lost in the first place. So essentially, they were Australian Aborigines in cultural terms, who didn't like somebody trying to leave because it messed up their whole system. So I wrote a little book about it. It made sense, right? Anyway, I knew I wasn't going to get this thing published. I mean, come on. So Don Weeb is this prof, and Chris Trotz in the department, or in the Trinity College, and Chris had me into the college by then. So I go to this talk by Don Weeb, and it was on religion. And with Don Weeb, he's always trying to prove religion's an illusion and evil, and we should eliminate it from the human condition. So I didn't even hear the talk. I just barged in after the talk and told him I disagree with everything you said. He said, you didn't even hear me. And I said, no, but Chris did, and he'll tell me what you said, and I already know what you're going to say anyway. From that moment on, we formed this friendship, a bantering, friendly kind of thing. Completely opposite ends of the scale, right? So when I came to him, I said, look, I've written this little thing on the Book of Genesis. I have no idea what to do with it. Do you want to read it? So he read it, and he comes storming into my office one day, waving it. He said, this is the worst possible thing. I've never read anything like this ever, and it's a pile of, whatever, but I want to publish it. So it's going to be the first book in the series, Toronto Studies in Religion. So it got published. And it turned out to be probably the best-selling one he ever wrote, or he ever published. And from then on, I just did a series for him. I did a number of other ones. And I would never have got them published anywhere, except maybe Return to Eden, maybe. I published one on the music with him, which is very complicated. And Aboriginal music is really complicated. It's all microtonal like Indian music. And And it's like a Bach fugue, the way it flows through the air, like it crisscrosses itself and goes back on itself. And had Gula doing it, had Gula interpreting Bach, and that's just a real experience. I was playing Bach to him, asking him to listen and tell me what he said, what it was like. And he listened, and listened. And he said, he says it's going backwards on itself. That's a fugue, right? Inversions, retrogrades, that kind of thing. He heard all that in Bach. He's an Aboriginal guy. That's because their music does the same thing. And so I wrote that up. And incredible. Like the complexity of that culture is so unbelievably mind-blowing. And we're not even that far into understanding it. I just understand a tiny bit. But imagine what was there to be understood. Unbelievable. And they had it all together. They had peace, order, and good government across an entire continent. There's no evidence of organized warfare across all of Australia in the pre-contact period. None. Nothing. Amazing. Amazing. Why would you steal from somebody if they're going to give it to you anyway if you don't have it, right? Why would you steal someone else's spiritual identity when it's not yours? It doesn't make sense. Nothing about violence and warfare makes any sense in an Australian Aboriginal context. None. And it worked. It's not just a little group here. It's the whole damn thing. Amazing. So anyway, so that's what happened. So Don Weeb kind of saved it. I was going to quit, you see. I was at the point I was going to quit and come back up here and live here. People up here were offering me all kinds of jobs, like carpenter's laborer and builder's laborer and, you know, just anything, right? I was really fed up. And then Chris, once I got into Trinity, it was different. Politics was different. People were all from different departments. So, you know, it wasn't all, you weren't all competing with each other for stuff. And like we had the anthropology department, it had the Marxists, and then there were the pseudo-Marxists, and then the real Marxists, and then there were the liberals, and then there were the, you know, you name it. I'm sure you've got them all. And they're all on their own little friggin' bandwagon, and nobody's really talking to anybody else. They're just fighting for supremacy. I thought, I'm out of here. And so I did. I kind of got half out, and it was good. Sort of good. And maybe I'd have been better off up here. Then you wouldn't have to do this, you see. Because I don't think you're going to be interviewing builders, laborers up here somehow. So, you know, like, that's what I mean by arrival. One day in your life that changed the course of everything from that point on was that day I was sitting on my bed in that room in Trinity College, and I got the news about my son. Changed everything. Some of it for the worse, some of it for the better. If that hadn't happened, it wouldn't have been Liam. Liam wouldn't have been here if that hadn't happened. Maybe it happened differently and would still be alive. We'll never know. But that film, just because you were coming, I'm saying, okay, the film's arriving, Liam and I are arriving at the film, and you're arriving here. There's got to be some meaning to that, some purpose, and there was. It kind of focused what I was going to do. And this whole thing about living in the moment, and the moment is all there really is, and time is a construct, not real, that we impose on reality. Yeah, I think there's something to that. So if you show this, you got to show the movie with it. But yeah, so in between 86 and 2000 about, I was in India. I got invited to join a group of students from Jawaharlal Nehru University to go on a trek across the north of India. And actually, it was a geography class. So they would be studying the indigenous people up there, and also the herding and the economic activities, the flora, the fauna, stuff like that. There's about 30 people. At the time, I was looking for some meaning in all of what had happened. So it looked like a good opportunity to Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, it's all up there, right? I figured I'd get a pretty good first-hand experience of things like that. And on the way, I stopped in Japan and spent some time in a monastery. And before that, I was in a Trappist monastery in New Brunswick for a bit, Christian monastery. And then at the end of it all, I was with an Ojibwe group in Ontario, and Jabani came over here to visit, and we had a sweat up there, and a shaman came, and all kinds of things there. So it was a good opportunity to just let go of the academic and just try to immerse yourself in these kind of experiences, right? But the Gujar thing was interesting because they're Muslims, and Muslims don't have a very good reputation right now for all kinds of right and wrong reasons, right, depending on who you talk to. And these people were nomadic, and I met them on this trek. And they invited me to come back and live with them the following summer in the mountains. So they were up in Pathankot. Pathankot is up in Himachal Pradesh on the lowlands. And the cattle, they have cattle, and they keep the cattle in the lowlands in the winter. And in the summer, they take them up to the mountains and graze them in the mountains. So you start down there, and then you go up there, and they walk them up there. And the north of India is a battleground historically. Like waves and people, armies coming through there, and Hindus and the Muslims, and then Buddhists. Well, the Buddhists didn't fight, but you have all kinds of influences up there. So a lot of the Gujar are Hindu, but a lot of them are Muslim, depending on which wave of invasion that they kind of attached themselves to, right? So these were my first real contact with Muslims who are devout Muslim. And it was a beautiful experience. I mean, if you have any idea what it's to be like when you're up at, I don't know, 10,000 feet, 15,000 feet, and you're sitting on a ledge, and there's huts are behind you, and you're looking out over the lower Himalayas, right? The ranges, sitting there in the morning at dawn. And there's a person sitting beside you in a traditional cloak with the Quran in front of them, chanting to the infinite, sitting there listening to this. And it's unbelievably beautiful. And you see that side of it. And he allowed me to sit there with them, even though they didn't even know what I was. They kept asking me if I believed in God or was Christian, and I kept kind of hedging it, right? But they didn't mind, right? They let me sit there and experience all this. And generous people, kind, generous, give you the shirt off their back, which they did. They had to support me up there. There was no stores or anything. You lived off the land, mostly milk products, and house you and take care of you and everything. And I spent 2 summers doing that. And I think anything so beautiful cannot be, how can you pervert that? And of course it has been, but then so has Christianity. It's been perverted, especially in the Middle Ages, right? So that's what I did. I went up there and I got into some harrowing experiences. I was in pretty good shape. I was probably about 170 pounds, fit as a fiddle, athletic. And I could not keep up with these old guys. They would just up the hills, up the mountain. You go up with the cattle and you get lost behind them. And these are cattle that are dangerous. These are they're trained to attack wild animals because there are leopards up there and bears, stuff. And these are dangerous animals. And you get left behind with somebody going up into the midst of the mountains. And then the next step you take, you've got a big bullocky looking at you about 20 feet away, ready to, and then this guy steps out and starts laughing at you. That's what it was like. And then they would sit in the mountains with the cattle and they'd play the flute. Another kind of, beautiful thing, right? So I came back and raised some money through a guy called Larry McDermott here, who was actually on the Human Rights Commission until recently in Ontario. He's an Algonquin native guy. We raised some money. He runs an organization called Plenty Canada. We raised some money, and I took it back over to them to build a dairy in Pétancourt. Because what happened was the Indian government started to think that these Muslim people were in sympathy with the separatists in Kashmir, just across the border, up in the mountains. So they started to persecute them and actually torture some of them. And then they forbid them to take their cattle back up to the mountains after I'd finished up there. So they had to stay all year round in Pétancourt, so they had nowhere to produce milk, right, and market it. So we helped them build a dairy, but had to take the money on my person. Had to be clandestine, couldn't be public. As if anybody saw it or got wind of it, they'd be in big trouble. I'd be in big trouble. But it got built, and they thrived. And you know what the irony was? Their biggest customer was the Indian Army, because their milk was the purest of all the milk that was produced up there. Crazy, eh? Crazy. And then I got, because of that, I got invited to be guest lecturer at Punjabi University. And so I went over there and gave some first lectures at Punjabi University on Indigenous religion. And the invitation of a fellow called Bhupinder Singh. And that was another interesting experience. You know, if you wanted me to come to Laval and give a lecture in French, maybe 25 years ago, I probably could have worked my way through it. Lecturing, I could read it okay, maybe, but lecturing in front of people like yourselves in French, that'd be peeing my pants. I'd be so nervous. Well, you're sitting there in a room full of Arabic, Hindu, Buddhist scholars who've read everything back for 2,000 years in this audience, and you're supposed to give them a talk on understanding Indigenous religion. And they're just sitting there, right? And you're like, oh, geez, this is scholarship, right? This is a tradition that's way beyond anything we got, right? This goes way back, right? So I'm pretty nervous. So I gave my talk, and they all stood up and clapped. I don't even know if they understood any of it, but that's being polite and stuff. And then after that, we took a couple of guys, we headed into a vehicle, and we headed for the rice fields with a couple of bottles of whiskey, because they're Sikhs and they're not forbidden to drink like our Hindus. And this is what they do. They go into the rice fields and they drink whiskey in the middle of the rice fields. And when you go into one of their houses, there's always a bottle of whiskey as you come in the door, and they pour it for you when they come in. It's part of Sikh customs. It's amazing.